This is from page 11 of your Math Mechanic Fractions and Mixed Numbers tutorial. Comparing fractions visually. Below are completed examples of comparing fractional pie charts. The fractional pie charts are accompanied with their numerical and word forms. In this box, we are going to compare the fractions 1/3 and 6/8. The pie below represents the fraction 1/3. This pie below represents the fraction 6/8. This pie has 1 out of its 3 pie slices shaded. 1 out of its 3 pie slices is shaded. This pie has 6 out of its 8 pie slices shaded. Again, I will repeat. This pie has 6 out of its 8 pie slices shaded. What we are going to do now is see which pie has the most area shaded. Right here is 1/3, and you see how much of its area is shaded here. And below the fraction 6/8, we're going to look at how much of its area is shaded. So as you can see, this is the area that is shaded for the fraction 6/8. So now we're going to compare. This pie has more of its area shaded than this pie. So the pie representing the fraction 6/8 has more of its area shaded than the pie representing the fraction 1/3. So the pie on the right is greater than the pie on the left because more of its area is shaded. Again, I will repeat. The pie on the right, which is the pie representing 6/8, is greater than the pie on the left, which represents the fraction 1/3, because more of its area is shaded. So again, 6/8 is greater than 1/3. We are now going to compare the fractions in this box. We're going to compare the fractions 4/7 and 1/9. 4/7 is represented by this pie below. 1/9 is represented by the pie right here. In this pie, you have 4 out of the 7 pie slices that are shaded. Again, 4 out of the 7 pie slices are shaded. Over in this pie, we have 1 out of 9 pie slices that are shaded. Again, I will repeat. We have 1 pie slice out of 9 pie slices that is shaded. So now we're going to compare the amount of shaded area in each pie. As you can see here, the amount of area shaded in this pie is greater than the amount of area shaded in this pie. In other words, this pie has more shaded area than this pie over here. Therefore, the pie on the left, which is right here, and represents the fraction 4/7, is greater than the pie on the right, which is right here, and represents the fraction 1/9, because more of its area is shaded. I will repeat. The pie on the left is greater than the pie on the right because more of its area is shaded. Again, this is the pie on the left. That you see the amount of area shaded. And here's the pie on the right. And this is the amount of area shaded. Therefore, this pie is greater than, the amount of area shaded in this pie is greater than the amount of area shaded in this pie. So, 4/7 is greater than 1/9. 4/7 is greater than 1/9. Here, in this box, we are going to compare the fractions 3/4 and 2/3. 3/4 is represented in the pie below. 2/3 is represented by the pie below, right here. In this pie that represents 3/4, you can see 3 out of its 4 pie slices is shaded. Are shaded. 3 out of the 4 pie slices are shaded. Over here, the pie representing the fraction 2/3 has 2 out of 3 pie slices that are shaded. Again, the fraction 2/3, the pie that represents the fraction 2/3 has 2 out of 3 pie slices that are shaded. Now, what we are going to do is look and see which pie has the most area shaded. We are going to look at each pie and see which one has the most of its area that is shaded. Okay. The pie that represents the fraction 3/4 has more of its area shaded than the pie representing the fraction 2/3. Okay. Look look again. Look at how much of the pie is shaded in the in the pie that represents 3/4. Look and see how much of its area is shaded and compare it to the pie that represents 2/3. Okay, you see it has more of its area shaded than the pie that represents 2/3. Therefore, the pie on the left is greater than the pie on the right because more of its area is shaded. The pie on the left, which is the pie that represents 3/4, is greater than the pie on the right, which is the pie that represents 2/3, because more of its area is shaded. Therefore, 3/4 is greater than 2/3. Again, I will repeat. The pie that represents the fraction 3/4 has more of its area shaded than the pie that represents the fraction 2/3. Therefore, 3/4 is greater than 2/3. Now we are going to move on to the next box. Here we are going to compare the fractions of 4/8 and 1/2. The pie that represents the fraction 4/8 is below, and the pie that represents the fraction 1/2 is right here below. The pie that represents the fraction 4/8 has 4 of its 8 pie slices shaded. 4 out of its 8 pie slices are shaded. The pie that represents the fraction 1/2 has 1 out of its 2 pie slices shaded. 1 out of its 2 pie slices is shaded. So, the pie on the left is equal to the pie on the right because both pies have an equal amount of area shaded. And looking at both pies, you can see that both pies have the same amount of area shaded. So, 4/8 is equal to 1/2. Again, I will repeat. This is the amount of pie area shaded in the in the pie that represents the fraction 4/8. And this is the amount of pie area shaded in the pie that represents the fraction 1/2. They have the same amount of area shaded. Therefore, they are equal. 4/8 is equal to 1/2. Now moving on to the next one. We're going to compare the fractions 5/6 and 7/8. The pie that represents the fraction 5/6 is below right here. The pie that represents the fraction 7/8 is right here. This one below, right here. As you can see here, the pie that represents 5/6 has 5 of its 6 pie slices shaded. Again, to repeat, 5 out of the pie's 6 pie slices are shaded. 5 pie slices are shaded. There are a total of 6 pie slices in all. So, there are 5 pie slices shaded out of a total of 6 pie slices. Over here, you can see in the pie that represents 7/8 that 7 pie slices are shaded out of a total of 8 pie slices. 7 pie slices are shaded out of a total of 8 pie slices in all. 7 pie slices are shaded out of a total of 8 pie slices. Now we're going to look at each pie. We're going to look at each pie and see which one has the most of its area shaded. Looking at this pie, you can see that more of its area is shaded compared to this pie over here. The pie that represents 7/8 has more of its area shaded than the pie that represents 5/6. Therefore, the pie on the right is greater than the pie on the left because more of its area is shaded. So, again, the pie that represents 7/8 has more of its area shaded than the pie that represents 5/6. Therefore, 7/8 is greater than 5/6. Now we go to the next box. Here we are going to compare the fractions 1/3 and 3/9. The pie that represents 1/3 is this pie right here, right below. The pie that represents the fraction 3/9 is this pie right here, right below. The pie that represents 1/3 has 1 out of its 3 pie slices shaded. It had, again, I will repeat, 1 out of its 3 pie slices is shaded. The pie that represents 3/9 has 3 out of its 9 pie slices that are shaded. 3 out of 9 pie slices is shaded. The pie on the left is equal to the pie on the right because both pies have an equal amount of area shaded. Okay. Right here, 1/3. 1 out of 3 pie slices is shaded. 1 out of 3 pie slices is shaded. Right here with 3/9. 3 out of 9 pie slices are shaded. 3 out of 9 pie slices are shaded. Looking at both of these pies, they both have the same amount of area shaded. So you can see right here, both have the same amount of area shaded. Therefore, they are equal. So, 1/3 is equal to 3 nights.